So, I've been told to keep the introduction very short because Ken's got a very information-packed presentation for us. So I'll try to ramble on too much because anybody that ever hears me speak knows that I can just keep talking and keep talking. But I'll just say that Ken was a former doctor in Orkney, and he first heard about John Rae while in Orkney too, and it's been a lifelong passion of Ken's. So he's certainly gained a wealthy knowledge of John Rae's life and his events in his life too. So I'll pass you over to Ken quickly to stop me droning on. And if there's a chat function as well down below, that if you have any questions, feel free to type it into the chat box, and hopefully at the end we'll have a time that Ken can answer some questions that anybody might have. So I will pass you over to the very capable hands of Ken Stewart.
Thank you very much, James, and good evening all. John Rae was the greatest of the Arctic explorers, not just because of his achievements, but also because of the pioneering methods he introduced to Arctic exploration. And yet, in his time, he came to be rejected by Victorian society. He was removed from history and forgotten, and for most, he continued forgotten. Certainly, I, for one, had not heard of John Rae in the late 60s when I worked in Orkney as a young doctor. Orkney is an exciting place full of surprises. Here in Stromness, at the bottom of the garden was Logan's Well, where for centuries ships, before crossing the Atlantic, had topped up with fresh water, and mentions made here of the Hudson Bay Company and also of Sir John Franklin. Round the corner, however, was Rae's Close, a tiny street of sheltered housing, which has the sign now up, declaring that in 1854, Rae discovered the last link in the Northwest Passage, and after 10 years of searching, the tragic fate of the flanking expedition. That surprised me. I'd always thought Franklin had discovered the Northwest Passage and McClintock the missing Franklin. And then in the magnificent St. Magnus Cathedral in Kirkwall, there's a very impressive white memorial monument showing John Rae in the prime of life, lying as if asleep under a buffalo hide with a gun and an open book by his side. And below the inscription Arctic Explorer with his qualifications, which I've copied out here to make them legible. LRCS Edinburgh, licentiate of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, the basic medical degree at that time. Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, Fellow of the Royal Society, which was a huge honour awarded for outstanding scientific research, and then 2 honorary degrees, Doctor of Medicine and Doctor of Laws from Montreal and Edinburgh universities, respectively. All this in very striking contrast to his humble gravestone in the kirkyard. Used to be difficult to read, better kept now, and also difficult to find. I wanted to know more. John Rae should have been famous and knighted. And if so, he had been forgotten and others credited. But why? At the time, there was no information readily available. No one seemed to know. Life was busy, so I too forgot John Rae. Time passed, and then years later, we were back visiting Orkney in October 2014. The very day, the local paper, The Arcadian, had this headline: "The Canadian wreck just discovered under the ice in the Arctic was Franklin's Erebus." Immediately, I remembered and was off to find out more. And so, to the local museum in Stromness, and then to Edinburgh, to the National Museum, to the National Library, to the Royal College of Surgeons, and then to Cambridge, to the Scott Polar Research Institute, where I spent 3 days reading John Rae's unpublished diary. All of it neatly handwritten, exciting and amusing. He had a great sense of humour, and this is what I learned. He was born here in 1813, the sixth of 9 children. The Hall of Cleshton, as it's known, was owned by the Lord Advocate of Scotland, but lived in by his estate manager, who was John Rae's father. And his mother was from Argyll, and the father was an Arcadian. The house stands alone in a field just up from the shore and looking west to the Atlantic and over to Stromness. It's a three-storied laird's house built in 1769 and until recently in a state of disrepair, but now owned by the John Rae Society and about to be refurbished. And this is Stromness as it was then in the early 1800s. And here's the Hudson Bay Company building as it was. And with beyond it on the island of Hoy, Ward Hill. Another view of his home. From his diary, John Rae thrived in the outdoor life and began developing survival skills at a very early age. He spent his boyhood shooting wildfowl and game on the moors and shoreline, fishing and climbing sea cliffs, and he made special mention of rolling great boulders down Ward Hill, which, quote, gave him great joy, suggesting, I suppose, that he thought big, was spirited, and took risks. But his favourite pastime was sailing, the Brenda, an 18-foot cutter, going out in all weather with his two older brothers. The father taught them careful seamanship, and he also helped to build boats and was taught to cut and rig sails, all of which would later stand John Rae in good stead. Down from the house above the shoreline, you can still see what's known in Orkney as the Noust, a boat-shaped, stone-lined hollow, the shape of a boat, and that's where the Brenda was kept in the winter. Difficult to find at first, but a thrill when you do. And it's got a beautiful natural rock jetty, with seen here at high tide, with Stromness 3 miles across the bay. Perfect for a boy. Also, playing the fiddle was an important part of his boyhood and future. This was his fiddle, now in Stromness Museum. And then, age 16, off to Edinburgh to study medicine. He would be here, the old Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, world famous then as now, and linked to names such as James Lind, first to describe scurvy, the scourge of the Navy then, and its treatment, and James Young Simpson, a fellow student and soon to be of chloroform fame. And here in the anatomy department in Old Surgeon Square in Edinburgh, where Dr. Knox and students dissected bodies. And here in the Lawn Market in 1829, where Burke, who provided the bodies for Knox, was hanged. These were interesting times. A nice wee rhyme from then, to which can be added, Burke's the butcher, here's the thief, Knox the yin who buys the beef. 25,000 watched, including Sir Walter Scott, John Rae and his fellow students. And he was here in the College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, and within the college, shown in this famous painting, the Viva, the hall where he had his final Viva exam in 1833. It's almost unchanged since then, examiners included. However, all was well, and John Rae graduated licentiate of the Royal College. Back home again, with Hudson Bay due west, his father recruiting and two brothers already there, almost immediately he signed on as ship surgeon to the Hudson Bay Company supply ship. It took 9 weeks across the Atlantic to Hudson Bay. a rough passage, and with an outbreak of typhus, a baptism of fire for the new doctor, but all survived. At Moose Factory, so called because the manager was called a factor, they unloaded the supplies, loaded up with furs, and set sail on the return journey with John Rae aboard. But the ice was early that year. They were iced in and trapped. With 30 men, he had to winter in an old abandoned camp. The next challenge, half of them developed scurvy, recognized by loose teeth, bleeding gums, sore limbs. They ran out of lemons. But Rae, remembering Lynn's teaching, managed the problems. He made the diagnosis and even discovered a new cure from cranberries found under the snow, which was stained red from the juice. Again, all recovered. His reputation was growing. Spring came, the ice melted, back to Moose Factory. The Hudson Bay Company were now anxious excuse me, to hold on to young Dr. Rae, and he eager to join them. So he signed on as surgeon and clerk. He readily agreed to do part of the general work on condition it never interfered with his treatment of the sick. And these were among his patients. He was there as much for the local Cree Indians for 100 miles around as for the Hudson Bay Company employees, 3/4 of whom were Acadian. He was a good and caring doctor, dealing with whatever came his way, including rheumatics, colds, etc., pregnancy problems, accidental acts and gunshot wounds requiring the occasional amputation, a grim business then, with alcohol still the only anesthetic. The patients were also his teachers. He learned from them how to live off the land, how to adapt, how to survive in the Arctic, at a time when befriending and learning from the Cree and later the Inuit could be treated with scorn and derision. Already a crack shot, he improved his hunting and trapping skills and learnt how to skin his catch and store it freezing under stone piles for later use. He was taught to catch, seal, and to fish under the ice, how to make pemmican cake, which is shredded dried wheat pounded together with fattened berries, good for the scurvy in the winter, how to handle wolves, how to fight grizzlies, real Davy Crockett stuff, and kayaking and canoeing down rapids, and what to wear, multiple layers of caribou and moose skin, hair side in for underwear, and hair side out, as in the animals, for outerwear. Waterproof sealskin boots, and for ground sheet, 2 hairy caribou skins, and how to travel. He soon became an expert with snowshoes. He designed his own to be seen in the museum at Stromness. But he was also a great snowwalker. He was a snowwalker of the age, and he came to travel enormous distances at speed. To patients, often through soft snow, he could do 60 miles a day for day after day. When you think of it, that's Edinburgh to Perth, a fair distance. He became a legend called a gluka, or long strider. Sledging, whether man-hauled or with dogs fanned out the Inuit way, the type of sledge to use, and for efficiency rubbed the runners with ice and moss. And also he enjoyed himself. Note the fiddler. R.M. Ballantyne of Dog Cruiser fame worked at the Hudson Bay Company, and he knew John Rae, and he wrote of him. John Rae was of average height, very muscular, active as a squirrel, full of animal spirits, and had a fine intellectual countenance. Good-humoured, natural, an excellent shot, could stand an immense amount of cold and fatigue. These qualities, along with his small boat skills, came to be recognised by Sir George Simpson, who was Hudson Bay Company Governor-in-Chief, one of the greatest, and he was known as the Little Emperor. He came from Dingwall. Sir George was eager to know the extent of the Hudson Bay Company's territory and to bush boundaries further north, perhaps to fresh beaverland. and this shows the northern region as known in 1845. The northern limits were not yet discovered, and a lot of it had also been wrongly charted by the Navy. He was also eager to find the elusive Northwest Passage, preferably before the Navy. This would link the UK and Hudson Bay across the north of Canada with the rich markets in China. The quest had proved fatal to hundreds, including Henry Hudson and his son, cast adrift in 1611, in fact near Moose Factory. Sir George, who had a droll sense of humour, invited Rae, he wrote to him, to take on the job of explorer. I'll give you a moment to read this. He had a nice turn of phrase, and at the end, a good little dig from a Dingwall man. And he came for the answer, how to do business visits to the Skirl of Pipes. Sir George always had a piper. Rae was eager to go. First off to the Magnetic Observatory in Toronto, and then for a 4-month course of survey work, charting and mapping. And finally, in 1845, Rae began his career as Arctic explorer for the Hudson Bay Company. Over the next 10 years, he went on 4 expeditions, first shown in black, second in red, black, second in red, third in blue, and the fourth in orange. He covered enormous distances and at the fraction of the cost of the Royal Navy, who also were exploring. And as you can see, he covered almost the entire northern coastline. Remembering that John O'Groats to Land's End's about 1,000 miles a long way, he did in fact over 13,000, and some say in total he walked, including his work, medical work, visiting Cree Indians and Eskimo, that he walked almost 26,000 miles, which is the circumference of the globe, of our planet. A long, long way, and a lot of it in small cutters, under sail or by rowing. But lines on the map convey only distance and time, not the planning or leadership required, nor the discipline of accurate surveying in difficult conditions, nor the exhaustion, hardship, difficulties and dangers, the cold, -40 often, the wet, the wind, the blizzards, the freezing fog, navigation and survey problems, hazards of handling small boats sailing in huge seas and sometimes pounding ice floes. And also, not to be forgotten, the tedium of being stormbound for days, like being in prison. Throughout they travelled the Inuit way, a small party travelling light and non-stop, fast-moving on snowshoe and sledge hauling, hunting as they went and using igloos rather than tents. They were hardened and picked Hudson Bay Company men, men of spirit and enterprise. They never stopped to eat or drink. And as John Rae writes in his diary, we had pemmican in our pockets, which we munched at our pleasure. John Rae's first expedition is the one in black here. His objectives were to explore and chart the length and the land and coast to the west of Hudson Bay around Coronation Bay, up here, which was unexplored. To search for sea and river links between Hudson Bay here and the Arctic here, and to find a Northwest Passage. He would set out from just north of York Factory. Here's York Factory. There were some concerns regarding recruitment. They would be unsupported for a year and a half, no shelter, no fires to warn them, no provisions. Europeans hadn't done it before. It seemed suicidal, with death from starving, freezing, or both. McTavish, a factor from Skye, thought so, as you can see. But no problems. 4 Acadians, 1 Highlander, 2 French Canadians, 2 Inuit, and 1 Cree signed up. In preparation through the winter months before leaving, Rae studied what was known of the natural history, the geology, the meteorology, plus the habits and customs of the local Inuit. And they would take with them a new invention, an easily carried Hackett airboat made from cotton impregnated with India rubber. One of the first inflatables, it proved very, very useful, even without paddles, as happened on one occasion. It's seen here in Stromness Museum. They set off in mid-June to Cheers in their two 22-foot cutters. They camped or sailed on at night. They headed up the west coast of Hudson Bay to Repulse Bay, called Repulse because it was cold, stark, and repulsive. The weather was foul, and the journey of 750 miles took 7 weeks. And then further north, it was hard going, dragging the boat round boulders and up rapids. They sailed and surveyed that part of the east coast not yet charted. This is Melville Peninsula, unknown, all of it, and then returned to Repulse Bay to prepare for the winter. They hunted caribou and muskox. They fished and caught sail, and they stored this for the winter, and also they built a stone house. They called it Fort Hope, and this is a photo from the 1930s, taken 85 years after it was built. It was roofed with moose hide and pulled over oars and masts. All was ready by November, and then followed an extremely Spartan life in severe cold. For food, they had what they had gathered and stored: venison, muskox, seal, and fish. They cooked using bog rosemary, moss, and heather. For fuel, for lighting, they used seal oil lamps. Rae filled the time teaching the 3 hours to his men successfully and recorded the weather, sky, magnetic observations. They also had to dig for fuel under the snow, which kept them busy every day, and for other exercising to keep warm, wrestling and running on the spot, and playing of the fiddle. And every Sunday there was divine service, but it was extremely cold, -10 to -40, and they soon came to realize that snow houses were warmer, so they built one. And again, they learnt from the Inuit two important principles: use warm, granular snow, which has more air in it for insulation, and build as shown here in a spiral. It took them 1 hour, once they could do it, to cut and construct a 10-foot diameter, 7-foot high and 6-inch thick igloo that would hold 5 or 6 men. It's all in the diary how to do it. And also a 2-inch thick pane of ice as a window. This was a huge improvement, and thereafter Rae always used igloos. The advantages: they could be used on return. There was no carriage or erection of tents, and particularly there were no condensation problems. The condensation became ice, which was windproof and added to the warmth. And they were warmer, as long as there was more than one person in it. One person provides one candle power of heat, so the more the merrier. He also advised on how to sleep in an igloo, headed in his diary 5 all in a row. And in his diary, he's got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are little heads which he drew, looking sideways. I tried to get a photo of that, but I couldn't. The librarian was objecting. Their jackets became pillows with 2 very hairy caribou skins as ground sheets, and one above as a blanket. John Rae was number 1 always, because he slept on the outside. He had to do magnetic and weather observations through the night. The other outsider, number 5, would be the next morning's cook. so was first to rise. And the other men, quarters 2, 3, and 4, were warm as toast, and so on. So, nice use of nautical terms, and that's how to sleep in an igloo. On the second journey in spring, they crossed again to Committee Bay and explored the west coast, with as always meticulous surveying and charting, despite very strong winds, drifting snow and rough ice in what proved to be the most exhausting of their journeys. And then back to the igloos at Fort Hope, and in mid-August, when the ice broke, it took until then, they headed south and they reached York Factory 4 weeks later. McTavish was amazed and delighted to see them. The outcome, they had established that Boothia is linked to the mainland. There's no Northwest Passage found, and 655 miles of new coast trace. And it was the longest Arctic coast journey ever made on foot, and also the first European party to winter in the high Arctic without the support of a depot ship. Back to London to report to the headquarters of the Hudson Bay Company, and Rae wrote a book, very well worth reading, with a detailed of the account of the expedition. The new approach to Arctic exploration was the most significant result of Rae's first expedition. Success and the book had brought to him recognition. For this and for a later expedition, the Royal Geographical Society would award him the Founder's Gold Medal. There was now concern regarding the Franklin expedition, which had departed Stromness 2.5 years before, at the same time as when John Rae had set out. In fact, 2 bomb ships, Erebus and Terror, had already been to the Antarctic with James Clark Ross and then refurbished, each with a greatly strengthened hull and powered with a railway train engine to make 4 knots. Also had steam central heating, loaded with canned food, library of 100 books, gramophone, and a camera. So very extremely up to date for these days. Sir John Franklin was in charge, age 59, looking a bit portly and perhaps not the best appointment, pushed into it a bit by his younger ambitious wife. In 1845, they had set sail to great national expectations and pride. They were last seen, some of you here, just about to enter Lancaster Sound by whalers. They were tethered to the ice, waiting for the ice to break up and to sail west to Alaska. This is all unknown territory. Hopefully sail west to Alaska and out through the Bering Straits, and so establish the Northwest Passage. They had gone 2.5 years and still they had not passed through the Bering Strait. The Admiralty were becoming alarmed. It wasn't known what had happened. It had become the Victorian mystery of the century, with all sorts of possibilities imagined, whether trapped in the ice or worse. To be likened in our time to the disappearance nearly 7 years ago now of Malaysian flight MH370, a continuing mystery. By early 1850, with no news, the Admiralty offered rewards, £20,000 to discover and effectively relieve the crews. That 20,000 is now worth 1.5 million. 10,000 to discover and relieve any one of the crew, and 10,000 to the first to ascertain their fate. Over the next few years, 35 expeditions and 50 search ships set out, some lives and ships lost. One of these search ships discovered a winter camp from 1845-46 on Beechey Island, which is to the north, up here, well to the north, latitude 75 north. And on this, There were no messages at all, only 3 graves. So the mystery continued. They'd been there, but where from there? To coordinate the search, the Arctic Council was formed, and this was an impressive group of senior naval men with Arctic experience. They planned a three-pronged approach: a search ship coming from the west, a search ship coming from the east, and then a land-based one up the middle. Sir John Richardson, pictured here, aged 60, volunteered to lead. He had already been on 2 expeditions with Franklin, in fact, up in this area, and he was a senior naval surgeon, had become a leading authority on Arctic biology. The objectives of the expedition, Martin read, were to search for Franklin in the East Arctic area along the north coast from the Mackenzie River to the Coppermine River. To cross over to Wollaston Land, as it was called, this was all unexplored. To search east and west. He and Richardson became close friends. They shared an interest in Burns and Shakespeare, with Richardson reciting Burns, who was a family friend of his. He came from Dumfries, and Rae reading from Shakespeare and the book of sacred verse given to him by Franklin's daughter, who also gave him a sewing kit. The going was hard, particularly for the Navy men who were unused to the hard slog and did not impress John Rae. They wintered, they encountered treacherous ice, they couldn't cross to Wollaston, they were forced to abandon one of their 2 boats, 2 days' march down the Coppermine River. It was very fatiguing and dangerous, 18-day journey back, and there was no sign of Franklin. They wintered at Fort Confidence, 100 miles up the Coppermine River, with only 1 boat now available. In the spring, Sir John Richardson and 20 naval men then returned home. On his second journey, this is the Coppermine River, that's where the boat had been abandoned. With only 1 boat now available in the spring, Sir John Richardson and the naval men had returned home. And in his second journey here, 5 Hudson Bay men planned, now without the naval party, to descend the Coppermine River again from Fort Confidence in the 1 boat, then to cross the straits to Wollaston Land, again searching for Franklin. Again, there was no sign of Franklin. Very severe weather, -30, fog and ice preventing crossing to Wollaston, by the worst by far. And in addition, one of his very best men, an Inuit interpreter, was drowned at Bloody Falls in the treacherous lower reaches. The only man he lost, this caused Rae great anguish, but he was in no way to blame. This had been the least rewarding of all his expeditions. Rae then returned to Simpson Factory. Meanwhile, the Arctic Council had become increasingly concerned, and public pressure was demanding results. An express canoe was sent to Rae with 3 urgent messages. From Sir Francis Beaufort, Chairman of the Arctic Council: I cannot let the mail go without telling you how intensely fixed all eyes are upon you. From Lady Jane Franklin, Franklin's wife: it has been the custom of many people to throw upon you everything the others have failed to accomplish. And from Sir George Simpson: I urge you to go further north, the manner and direction of any search being left to your discretion and judgment. Considering and remembering that he was later to be totally forgotten, these were remarkable votes of confidence in John Rae, and show the high esteem in which he was held. He had indeed arrived. The Hudson Bay Company agreed to support another expedition led by Rae. So, back to Fort Confidence to winter and prepare. Two boats would be required for the search expedition. John Rae drew on his Orkney boyhood experience, and as reminding me here, and with one of his men, a carpenter, he designed and they built two 22-foot coast boats from the local trees, and John Rae cut and rigged the sails. This pen and ink sketch by John Rae shows Fort Confidence, winter time, and the year 1851, 1852. And also it shows here, if you can see it, is written coast boats being built. Incidentally, also a very good sketch. There aren't many sketches of John Rae seen. This is one of the few, I think. In the third expedition, as John Rae had already tried and failed twice to get over to Wollaston, and they had to search here. This time, setting off in early March, Rae, with two of his men, managed to cross over on foot before the ice melted. And they went west and north over unexplored territory, then turned and went south and east along the south coast. They hunted and built igloos as they went. They found no trace of Franklin. There was no sound separating Wollaston from Victoria as had been expected, and no sign of the Northwest Passage or of Franklin. They then recrossed back over to the mainland on the ice before it had melted, and immediately met up with his other men who had sailed the boats down the copper mine from Fort Confidence. And together they sailed east, with the sea often ugly and choppy. It was sailing along here. It was thick, cold, fog added to the difficulties. And then when they reached Victoria Sound, which is here, Rae found thick, impenetrable pack ice, impossible to get through, and they failed 3 times to cross to King William Island, which is about 40-50 miles. But then, creeping back west along the shore of Parker Bay, they discovered a 6-foot flagpole and a half a mile on, a stanchion with Royal Navy markings. On the return journey, they found themselves on the worst seas ever. And reading from John Rae's diary account, a stiff breeze increased to a gale. A very heavy sea was running, which broke over from stem to stern and bent and twisted the slightly built but sturdy little crafts in every direction. At last the weather became so bad that I had to look out a little harbour, dangerous work as we had to run almost among the breakers before it was possible to see whether the place we made for would afford a shelter. But we were fortunate, and at 9:30 a.m. we were snugly moored in a landlocked bay, the entrance into which was not 20 yards wide. Great seamanship and great wee boats. As to the outcome from the third expedition, they had found the first possible sign of missing ships, but otherwise no sign of Franklin. It's also uncertain. It could have been Erebus or Terror or search ship wreckage, because they knew that search ships had disappeared further north. They had also established there was no sound separating Wollaston and Victoria, and they had charted 630 miles of previously unknown coastline. Despite not having yet found Franklin, John Rae sailed home to even greater acclaim and to the Founders Gold Medal from the Royal Geographical Society, and this was for his first and third expeditions. Sir Roderick who was from Inverness, added, with a great boldness, he determined on wintering in the high Arctic, accompanied by 2 men only, and trusting solely for shelter to snow houses. He accomplished a distance of 1,080 miles in 39 days, a feat which has never been equalled in Arctic travelling. Rae now prepared for his fourth expedition, marked in orange, as he set out to explore and chart the west coast of Boothia, and so complete his mapping of the Arctic coast and search for a northwest passage. Hope was now fast fading, and the search for Franklin was no longer the primary objective, although they were still looking. Rae and his men wintered again at Fort Repulse. The stone house was still there, but they preferred the igloos. They left Repulse Bay, and after 4 days they reached Pelly Bay and News. At Pelly Bay, they met an Inuit hunter wearing a gold ribbon from a Royal Navy cap, which he had been given by a fellow hunter. He told Rae, and the hunter himself hadn't been there, but information secondhand, very vague. The hat band could have come again from a Navy search ship further north. Several of them had already been lost and abandoned. Rae traded for the gold ribbon and offered more rewards for any further information or relics once he had returned to his winter quarters at Repulse Bay. He continued west across Boothia, temperature very cold, 60 degrees below, and 2 of his men developed frostbite and could not continue, so had to rest and waited in the igloo for Rae's return. Rae and the 2 others continued west. From the uncertain road map, and this is, here we are, from the uncertain naval map, I should say, of 1845, Rae expected going west to lead on to King William Land, as it was known. But the coastline, instead of going west, was going north. And Rae found, moving over here, Rae found that in fact he was on, instead of land, he was on fresh, new sea ice. Very different from the permanent and impenetrable pack ice which was present elsewhere. And Rae knew from his experience that in summer, here we are, that in summer this would be open water with a known open water to north and to south and east. In fact, he had found the final link in the Northwest Passage, which was here, and this became known as Rae Strait. Instead of proceeding on to search for Franklin, John Rae had to turn back. He had 2 unfit men left in the igloo, one of whom later required surgery for frostbite damage. And the Inuit report had been far too vague to act on. He needed more information. 4 weeks later, at Pelly Bay and then at Repulse Bay, Rae did meet other Inuit with relics to trade and stories to tell. Of the many relics, this small silver plate stamped here, Sir John Franklin, confirmed he had proof to back up the news he had received, which was as follows. In the spring, 4 winters past, some Eskimo were killing seals near the north shore of a large island, which Rae reckoned to be King William Island. They were seen travelling southwards over the ice, dragging a small boat and sledges. The leader wore a telescope strapped over his shoulder. He carried a gun, and they were passing down the west side. By signs, they were led to believe that the boats had been crushed by the ice and they were going where they expected to find deer to shoot. In the following spring, when the Inuit visited a river further south down here, they found about 30 corpses. Some bodies were in a tent, some under the boat, which had been overturned to form a shelter. And one of the men who died had a telescope strapped over his shoulder, so it was the same group. And there was evidence of cannibalism. Rae now had a major decision to make. Should he return and report, or should he stay and search? To wait until the following year, however, when the ground was again frozen and he could make 450-mile journey back to King William Island, cross over and search, he thought out of the question at the time. And he wrote in his diary, "I came to think that I had a higher duty to communicate with as little loss of time as possible the melancholic tidings which I had heard, thereby saving the risk of more lives being lost from ships searching further north in the wrong quarter of the Arctic. They were up searching around Beechy Island." So return he did, and Rae submitted a full confidential report, first one to the Admiralty and the other to the Hudson Bay Company alone and confidential. And this included the message from the mutilated state of the bodies and the contents of the cooking pots. It's evident that our wretched countrymen had been driven to the last resort as a means of prolonging existence. He also wrote separately to the Times without mention of the cannibalism. To his horror, however, the full Admiralty report, including cannibalism, was somehow leaked to the press and published. Rae's report immediately damned him in the eyes of the Victorian establishment. The Last Man, which is this painting here, and lurid images appeared in the press and made the headlines. How dare this man who dressed and mingled with the natives suggest that men of the Royal Navy would indulge in cannibalism, and more to the point, without first verifying it. Particularly tricky was Lady Jane Franklin in her late 50s. She had raised a statue in Waterloo Place to commemorate the great Arctic navigator who had sacrificed their lives in completing the discovery of the Northwest Passage. She was furious that Sir John and the Royal Navy had been accused of cannibalism, that Rae, not Franklin, had found the last link, that Rae had failed to visit the area with the reporting Inuit, that Rae was a fur trader and he had gone native, and she also opposed the award of £10,000 to Rae from the Admiralty. Aiding Lady Jane Franklin was the highly influential writer Charles Dickens, who published articles in Household magazine rejecting Rae's conclusion and the manner in which he reached them. And he wrote, as on the slide, the Eskimos are covetous and cruel. Had the Eskimos murdered them, it'd be impossible that the British naval men would or could, in any extremity of hunger, alleviate the pain of starvation by this horrible means. A bit tough on Rae, remembering the previous adulation. But Rae refused to back down. He reaffirmed faith in the accuracy of the Inuit reports, again explained his reasons for not going immediately to King William Land, now he knew an island. And to summarize, he'd done all this. Sir George proposed a knighthood, but he had also suffered the wrath of Lady Jane and Dickens, ostracized by Victorian society, and there was no knighthood. But at least the Admiralty had believed in him. He had been awarded £10,000, which he shared with his men. After 23 years with the Hudson Bay Company, Dr. John Rae retired at the age of 43, but he was not finished yet. In 1856, he began to organize another expedition with his two older brothers in Hamilton, Ontario. Using his award money, they built an 80-ton schooner, the Iceberg, and planned to sail the Northwest Passage through the Rae Strait, but it was not to be. Tragically, the Iceberg sank in a fierce storm in Lake Ontario, and it's still registered as a wreck. A cruel disappointment and a huge setback. Meanwhile, Lady Jane was now without support from the Admiralty, who had called the search off. There were no survivors after 14 years. They were now fighting a war in Crimea, but helped by private subscription, she funded the Fox expedition with a Captain Leopold McClintock from Dublin to lead it. Before leaving, McClintock was very fully briefed by John Rae on exactly where to search. Very generous of Rae, given that he had just lost the Iceberg. McClintock sailed for the northeast coast of King William Land, sailed its way down here to the northwest coast of King William Land, and made two important discoveries. First, in May 1859, a large cairn was found, and in it was a small brass cylinder, and it was found here at a place called Victory Point. And in the brass cylinder was a heavily rust-stained Navy regulation form on which were two separate messages. The first was written on the 28th of May 1847 by a small sledge party visiting the shore from Erebus and Terror, which were wintering in the ice here. So they were here, the cairn was here, and they left this message which said, Sir John Franklin commanding and all well. However, on the 25th of April, that's 11 months later, a second message told of a desperate change of fortune. The ships had continued trapped in the ice for 18 months. Both were ice damaged and had been abandoned. 105 sailors had landed and were almost to set off south, and were about to set off south the next day, grabbing boats and supplies. Franklin had died on June the 11th, which was only 2 weeks after the message reporting it he was alive and well, and further 24 men had died. And the 105 survivors then set off south. And the next discovery was this is the rusty Navy form, a unique document, the only record, in fact, so far recovered from the Franklin expedition. And then the second discovery, 20 miles south from here, they found buried in the snow and on an oak sledge a 28-foot boat with two human skeletons, plus silver plates, sheets of lead, and other senseless objects. And also the boat was pointing back to the ship, to the wrecks, which was a bit of a mystery. McClintock, the Arctic Fox, as he became known, returned to London to be lionized, knighted, and given freedom of the city. But he never acknowledged Rae's huge contribution to the McClintock success, and he never confirmed or mentioned cannibalism, which of course he would know all about, and he publicly snubbed John Rae. Confirmation of the veracity of John Rae's findings came nearly half a century later, and 10 years after John Rae had died. Roald Amundsen, aged 31, sailed the 70-foot, 47-ton Goa through the Rae Strait to confirm that it was in fact the final link in the Northwest Passage. This was his route down here through the Rae Strait and out and through the Bering Strait. And this was his crew. There is Amundsen, who would later beat Scott to the pole. This was in 1906, so it was just 5 years later than this. He was at the South Pole, along with two of these men, this one and this one. He was a great supporter of John Rae. In fact, he regarded him as his mentor and inspiration. And he wrote in 1906 that John Rae deserves the very highest credit for his Arctic exploration, work of incalculable value to the Goa expedition. He discovered the Rae Strait, written by Amundsen, 1906. Further vindication of John Rae's reports came in the 1980s and 90s when osteoarchaeologists examined human bones recovered from down the west coast of King George Land. And you can see here evidence of defleshing knife cut marks on human bones, 1, 2, 3, 4. These could be carried along as a food supply. The other evidence was of what's known as end-stage cannibalism, characterized by bone breaking, and pot polish is here, from boiling of bones in water to facilitate marrow extraction. And then in September 2013, part of a boat launching davit bearing the broad arrows of the Royal Navy was found again on the northwest coast, beach of King William Island. A magnetometer, first on sledges and then a low-flying helicopter, located metal underwater, and this led on to underwater side scan sonar, which showed the Erebus. And the photo which I saw in the Arcadian. Scuba divers have been down, but as far as is known, there's no sign yet of papers or photos. And then in September 96, ultrasound scan revealed HMS Terror discovered in Terror Bay. This amazing photo taken by subaqua divers shows Terror on the seabed looking remarkably intact. And here we have the position of these ships. King William Island, where Terror and Erebus were abandoned, where the survivors landed, and the cairn, where the cairn was. There's where Erebus was found, and there's where Terror was found. Returning to John Rae, in 1860, 4 years after he retired from Hudson Bay Company, John Rae married Kate, an Irish Canadian, and they had 33 happy years together. No children, but many nephews and nieces. They lived mainly in London, but also for long spells in Orkney. He continued with exploration and surveying, not in the Arctic, further south, first in 1861 on a proposed telegraph link from Caithness to Orkney to Shetland to the Faroes to Denmark and then to Labrador, to Iceland, Faroes, Iceland, Labrador, across the Faroes and so on. And in 1864, his wife joined him searching for telegraph links, suitable land from Winnipeg to the Pacific. And then again, later on from Siberia to Alaska, across the Bering Strait. So he was kept busy doing that. And also he did some general practice. And in later years, he wrote widely on natural history, geography, and anthropology of the Canadian Arctic, and read papers at the Royal Society of London, who in 1880 honoured him with a fellowship which he greatly valued. His love of sailing had continued to the end, and the last letter he wrote was one of apology for a late subscription to his sailing club in Kirkwall. He died in London from he died in London from an abdominal aortic aneurysm, but at his request, his funeral was in Kirkwall. Every shop was closed as a mark of great local respect, but without national sentiment or eulogy expressed. He's remembered not by a knighthood, as deservedly were other Arctic explorers, but by place names all over the Arctic map: rivers, valleys, isthmuses, hills. He's remembered by the books written by him and about him. And in July 2004, the Secretary of State for Scotland introduced a motion to the UK Parliament recognising John Rae's discoveries. And then in early October 2014, a memorial plaque funded by the John Rae Society was unveiled in Westminster Abbey by the Dean. More recently, the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, on its 50th anniversary, sponsored the Arctic Return Expedition. It did so to heighten awareness of John Rae and help the John Rae Society in Orkney fund the restoration of John Rae's birthplace to convert it into a world-class Arctic History Centre, celebrating the Inuit, the Hudson Bay Company, Arctic exploration, and John Rae. 4 set out, but as had Rae, they experienced severe weather, and 2 had to withdraw on medical grounds. Even in good weather, however, it was hard going. The other 2, David Reed and Richard Smith, completed the 450-mile route in 30 days with temperatures as low as -30 to 40 at night. And finally, returning to the memorial in the cathedral, erected by public subscription within 2 years of his death. In 1910, Dr. Edward Wilson, who later, 2 years later, was to die with Scott in the Antarctic, and he wrote, "In the nave is a monument which I liked before and determined to sketch this time. It looks so natural and nice, honoured by his own people and caring nothing about the rest." It's also said, when the light falls on it in late summer, his faith is bathed in warm gold. I leave the last words to Sir Michael Palin, patron of the John Rae Society. He clearly was one of the key figures in Arctic exploration. His methods, outlook, determination, a precursor of the great Scandinavian explorers, his meaning Fridtjof Nansen and Amundsen, that were to come later, a man ahead of his time. And if you too would like to join the John Rae Society, you are more than welcome. I would like to acknowledge my sources and thank you for your attention. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Ken.
Oh, good.
That was fantastic. I've got a whole bookshelf full of John Rae books, and there's so many things in there that I'd never even heard of. It's fantastic to hear so many new bits of information.
Thank you.
So
I think you detail how we talk as well. Like you, I've read a few books, and in my own mind, I was envisaging something totally different than what we heard tonight. So thank you very much for giving us such an in-depth insight to what Rae actually did.
Thank you.
It's certainly a refreshing perspective on the whole story, because you think you know it all, and you think you've got a well rounded vision of the whole thing, but then even with the pictures and things he chose to incorporate with it, it's just giving it a whole bringing to life. So thank you very much, Ken. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So if nobody else has got any questions, we'll just say thank you.
There's one other thing, James, which I didn't mention, I just come to, and that is the cause of death. It's very strange that so many died within 2-3 years of leaving Orkney. And in fact, can I show you another slide? These three graves on Beachy Island, discovered in 1857 by a search ship further north. Bodies were exhumed, and they discovered that various problems. Scurvy was the main cause of death. 29 had died when the survivors, 102 survivors, reached King William Island from the two ships. By then, within 3 years, 29 had died, including Franklin. No reason for the deaths was given on that one message that we have surviving. No reason was given for the deaths. However, autopsy on these bodies showed scurvy, along with TB, pneumonia, and clostridial bowel infection. In addition, bones and hair samples had very high lead levels, and also found were many food tins which had been sealed imperfectly, with lead solder running down the inside of them, making them poisonous. So it could be that lead poisoning was part of the problem. So that helps perhaps explain why so many young lives were lost so early. And of course, ultimately, death would be due to exposure and to starvation and scurvy and these other things. TB was rife on that boat as well.
It's just a bad combination of lots of different things, isn't it?
Yeah, impossible. There's a program on television just now, which is, of course, it's all fiction, but they try to assess what was happening. I've forgotten the name of it.
Is it called Terror, I think?
Terror, yes.
That's it.
Yeah.
Terror.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. So these are the facts as far as I'm known. There's nothing about attacks by polar bears or nothing, as in terrors last night.
Would the lead be a kind of slow deterioration of the body, or would it be quite a quick?
I think slow deterioration. Remembering also, of course, that lead piping in these days, in Victorian days, the pipes were lined with lead. And I think lead poisoning perhaps was not so uncommon in life, normal life, assure.
Can you hear me okay?
We've got a question here, Ken, that says, is there any ongoing attempt to recognize Dr. Rae by the UK as a nation?
Not as far as I'm aware.
No, I don't think so. Everything's quite slow. But hopefully in the very near future, the more that things pick up and the more the profile is raised, that hopefully that people will catch on. I think it takes a while for these things to repair itself, doesn't it? And there was so much damage done to John Rae's reputation that it's stuck.
I would think, James, increasing recruitment to the John Rae Society would help.
Yeah.
And I do think if they can achieve the ambition of creating Clestrand into an Arctic history centre of national standing, that would be a great thing. It would be a great thing for Orkney as well.
Yeah,
There's also a very important dimension about the way Rae worked with the Inuit and native peoples in Canada, both as an employee of the Hudson Bay Company and in his exploration. And I really think that's an important and fruitful link that perhaps in our more inclusive days, we should be much more attuned to. Whereas clearly the Victorian response was very damning of what could be learned from local people about survival, or indeed the information about the Franklin exhibition.
Yes. I think also in Canada, there's an increasing interest in John Rae and the Hudson Bay Company. The other thing I have in mind, close to where I live, which is near Stirling, we have the Wallace Monument in Stirling, a national monument, and a room in that monument is called the Hall for Heroes, and it's filled with the Victorian heroes, and it'd be nice if we could include John Rae. So that's another thing perhaps we should attempt to do. John Rae is remembered in Westminster, within the Abbey, but it'd be good to have his memory also in the Hall for Heroes, in the Wallace Monument in Stirling.
You think with the global warming and the reduction of the Arctic ice, more things will become revealed that are still there?
Well, it could be. Nobody knows where Sir John is buried, where Franklin is buried. Very probably, in fact, without doubt, on King William Island. It was thought perhaps his body could still be on board the Erebus, but that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
So that is something that could well emerge. And lots more, no doubt.
I think a lot more will emerge as time goes on, won't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Ken, somebody's asking that said that I read that Rae said his narrative had been edited to the point that he didn't recognize it. And do you know anything about that?
Rae, how do you mean, James?
I think it's maybe his narrative that maybe he put to the like maybe his report that he wrote. Was it changed in any way?
Not as far as I'm aware. All what I know is I've read what he wrote, which is down, excuse me, in Cambridge. That's just my source, really. And he wrote that.
So you were looking at the manuscript?
Yes, his
Great.
writing. Beautiful handwriting.
Yeah, it is. And then the collection that was published afterwards, I think a couple years after that exploration. I'm sorry, I can't remember where I read it, that he was not happy with the publication because it had been edited.
Oh, I don't, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sure they edited it to suit their own,
Yeah.
story, really. That's why nothing is ever quite as it seems, at the time. But then you have to look in and beyond that,
Yeah.
get to the truth, which you.
There's a related question in the chat. Does somebody else want to read it, or asking about what the diaries looked like and how he carried them? I'd love to hear that answer.
All I saw was the one big diary.
And what did it look like, Ken?
It's just a big diary.
Right, okay, so
It's in the Polar Institute in Cambridge.
Mhm.
and was that what he carried with him?
No,
No, that was just like something that was compiled later.
yes, yes.
I think we have visions of this kind of battered and beaten bit
Yeah.
of paper that he's carried around with him on all these voyages. They must be surviving somewhere, you'd think.
Yes.
You might well turn up on the Antiques Roadshow one day.
Yeah.
We'll have to keep our
No.
eyes open.
Hope no. Ken, I just want to thank you very much. That was lovely. I never tire of the story at all. And excuse me, living up here in Orkney just makes me so, excuse me, so proud.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah, and so you
certainly
should
does.
be.
But I just never tire of that story. It's super.
Yes. It is
Thank
lovely.
you.
Thank you.
Could I just ask, where we are in the restoration of the Hall of Clestron, as I've known it since I was a very young girl?
Well,
I know the John Rae Society.
I think James.
I know it owns it now.
Yes, yes. It's now, well, I'm afraid I don't want to tell you because I haven't, because of COVID, I wasn't up last year. So I don't really know.
No, neither was I, very sadly.
Yes. James, how's Clestron going?
It's well, certainly, well, we do own it now, and it's been things have been taken over very well during the whole of the last year. We've had so many teams meetings of the trustees and trying to move things forwards, and there's various different things happening that's hopefully be released very soon. But we're just kind of plugging away at the moment and trying to raise as much profile as we can, and like things like this talks, it all helps raise money for the final restoration. But certainly there's things moving in very exciting directions, which hopefully we'll be able to publicize very soon.
Good.
That's good. I'll be hoping to be up this year.
Good.
Grand.
Well, certainly, if you're up,
Following the society on, I mean, I'm way down in Yorkshire. We haven't been up at all to Orkney this year either, for obvious reasons. But following with the society's bulletins, email and Facebook have been really useful about the excavations and the various instalments of what's been going on. So if people aren't picking up those on a regular basis, I really would suggest it's a very good way of just keeping in touch on a rolling basis of what's being done. And I really do appreciate the work. I appreciate the work that the trustees and others are putting into this. For those of us who don't get to Orkney, it's a really valuable link. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. It's good to know, because we've got so many different supporters all over the world, and it's nice to know that everybody's kind of sharing the passion as well. It really means a lot and helps us keep going, I think. It's difficult at times, especially at the moment where we're not having like open days and things. We're not getting to meet face to face with folks, so it's difficult to try and keep that fire going sometimes. But it's good to know that we've still got the support from everybody. It means a lot.
Certainly does.
Right, okay, so I think that's a really good place to end it. Thank you all very much for coming. It's been fantastic. I've certainly really enjoyed it anyway. We've got more talks coming up in the series of online talks as well. The next one's on the 31st, and it's with an Arctic sailor, Bob Shepton. He's going to talk about his voyage into Baffin and Greenland with the Wild Bunch. He says his Wild Bunch is a group of climbers apparently that he takes on his Arctic expeditions, and he's been through the Northwest Passage a couple of times, and he's sailed all around the Arctic. And I think it'll be a fascinating talk as well, just to hear from somebody that's been in that environment, because there's not very many people that have, so it should be really good as well. Thank you very much again to Ken and for everybody that came,
Yeah,
and
thank you.
thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
really good.
Thank
See you in
you.
Orkney. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
Ken.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Ken.
all.
You.
Thank you.